Looks like a dead heat at the top of the ticket for the governor's race in Oklahoma. But those down ballot races not good for the Democrats. And the ACLU has a plan to do something about prison overcrowding. Haven't we heard that before? It's all next. Mitchell Talks, the News 9 Sessions coming up. Welcome back to Mitchell Talks, the News 9 Sessions. Mr. Brillback, how are you?
I'm well. Where's Grant Herms?
I don't know. Where is he? Y'all got Herms over there somewhere? I don't see him. Kids. You can't keep up with them.
You know, that's the problem. Millennials.
Oh, man. What are we going to do about them people? All right, so let's just get into this Sooner poll. We have a great pollster that works for News 9, Sooner Polls, Bill Shepard. I'm looking at these numbers. At the top of the ticket, it looks like a horse race all the way to November, not so much down ballot. Why don't you take us through? You've been going through this all evening yesterday. What's going on with this poll? What's it tell you?
Yeah, News 9 exclusive poll shows Stitt 46.6%, Edmondson 44.2%. Given that margin of error, this is an exact statistical dead heat.
Kevin Stitt, the Republican, is benefiting greatly from having run in the runoff election in August. It raised his name ID, it raised his profile among general election voters. But right now, as the race stands, he only has a 2-point lead on Drew Edmondson, who is benefiting much more from getting more Republican votes than he's losing Democrats in this poll. And among moderates, he leads 70 to 20%. So this race will literally come down to very, very tight race as we see it develop over the next 2 months.
Now, Libertarian Chris Powell has just over 3%. 6% of those surveyed say they haven't yet made up their minds. So here's what that tells me, that 6%, that's not going to win or lose the election. And the possible 3% that Chris Powell takes is not going to win or lose the election. What's going to win or lose the election is how much either one of these two candidates can energize their base and get their base out there to vote. But right now, Republicans are voting for Republican, Democrats are voting for the Democratic candidate. There's not a whole lot of crossover between the two of them. That's where I see it going until the very end. This is going to be tight until the very end unless somebody really, really screws up.
So you're saying they got to energize their base. Now, back on the East Coast in Washington, D.C., the way to energize the base out there is to go insane, okay? Anybody who saw those Supreme Court hearings, right now, Michael Avenatti's got to be the leading contender for the Democrat nomination for president because Kamala Harris and what's his name, Cory Booker, they just were embarrassing. And, of course, the president goes out and does his stand-up comedy routines. But that's how they're doing it in D.C., make the base crazy with crazy stuff. These do not appear. Drew Edmondson's not a guy that's going to go wacko on the
Never
trail.
has been.
And we just don't know about Stitt. They're both looking at this. We've got 6-7 weeks to go. What do you do to fire up the base without going full tilt cartoon character?
Well, what we do know is that the cartoon character thing doesn't work here in Oklahoma. We saw the whole Cornette Stitt with the Bull Stitt ad, and we saw that anyplace else in the country that would have worked. Here, that failed pretty miserably. I don't think that helped Cornette at all. What I think it did do is raise some name awareness and probably some sympathy for Stitt and probably helped him out. So is an attack ad going to be the answer? No. Are we going to see them? Oh, absolutely we
100
are.
miles an hour, as they say, Garvin County.
Because when you're in a fight and you start losing the fight, you start swinging wild. And right now, both of these guys are, they're a dead heat. Somebody's going to start swinging wild.
And what we'll hear is we'll have people in the media say slinging mud. I prefer comparison ads, for the record here, because comparison ads work. I would take you back to the runoff where Kathy Costello led almost the entire race against Elijah Osborne. It was that last-minute ad, a comparison ad, talking about doing something, by the way, the media wouldn't do, which was get into those races about a fact-checker type of thing, which we do here. Herms does. You do that. But some of those down ballot races, which we're about to talk about, they didn't matter to the media, and so therefore it was all paid ads. But this race, not so much.
Right.
The media is going to be involved in this one, eyeball deep.
Got to be 150%. But those down ballot races that you talked about, you're absolutely right. I don't think that we're going to see a whole lot of media focus on that because right now, according to this poll, a lot of this is a done deal. Let's take a look at the Attorney General's race. It shows Attorney General Mike Hunter with 52.1% of the vote, Mark Miles, the Democrat, with 34.2% of the vote. So that means that if the vote was held today, Mike Hunter would win.
Well, at this point, Mike Hunter is benefiting from that contentious runoff because that kind of attention and high profileness has helped people already make up their decision going into the general election. Typically, candidates that aren't discussed very much tend to produce better or not poll as well. And so he's doing really well right now. He's in the 40s, but he's getting about 11 points net crossover vote from Democrats, which is a positive sign. But he's losing among moderates by 20 points. So that could hurt him as we get closer to November.
So Mike Hunter is still running on the momentum from the most recent race in August. He's still running on that. Mark Miles is a relative unknown. He's going to have to do a lot to try to play catch up, especially as a Democrat in a very red state. I don't see it happening.
He needed a runoff.
He needed a runoff.
I mean, these people that are in these runoffs got help because of the runoff. Bill Shepard said that. And so people don't know, except for Democrats, very partisan Democrats, they don't know who Mark Miles is.
Right.
The question is he going to have enough name ID to go forward? And by the way, are we going to see an endorsement of the Attorney General before the elections are with perhaps by his runoff opponent?
We may. I don't think he really needs it at this point, quite honestly. They turned buddy towards the end of what was a very contentious, very nasty race. We may, but I don't think Hunter's really going to need it.
Can I jump back up the ticket there for just a moment?
Yeah,
are we going to see the former mayor and the lieutenant governor get involved with Stitt? You think they'll endorse him?
I bet we do. He's going to need it.
He sure is. Let's go to Superintendent of Public Instruction. That was interesting. She had a runoff, the Superintendent Hoffmeister. We were talking about her last week because she decided to tell the governor that I'm not going to do that request that you have dealing with the schools to go on a consolidation list. To be frank, that's what it was.
Yeah.
It's very political, and she said no. Now she's running against John Cox. That's a repeat.
Yep.
People are telling me that this is the one down ballot race that could perhaps get interesting, but John's really far behind it in the Sooner poll.
He's getting whooped. The superintendent right now is at 50.6%. John Cox, the Democrat, is at 31.3%. And right now, she's very well loved.
She polled very well in the primary and in the runoff. For someone who has been through a very difficult first 4 years, it's a pretty amazing feat. She's already at 50%, so if the election were today, according to our numbers, that she would win. She is also having a more difficult time with moderate voters, just like Mike Hunter is in the Attorney General's race. But she's getting as much as 25% of liberal voters, which is not typically you see for a Republican. But I think that's some of the source of her real strength. Is that she appeals as a superintendent in education beyond just more of an ideological base. She appeals to other voters as well.
And so that tells me that she's not only respected by Republicans for her political stance, but Democrats are also jumping on board with her. That's a very, very difficult fight for John Cox. Larry Huff, the independent, is only at 9.3% of the vote. I don't think he stands a chance at this point unless something really serious happened.
Let's put yourself in, it's an unfair position, put yourself in terms of being a Democrat boss, and you're looking down the down ballot races. They've got what's the nice way to put it? It's not a real competitive field, okay? The Democrat
that's
bench.
That's a fair way to put it.
It's kind of weak. Let's just face it, all right? They had all, the Democrat Party was decimated because of term limits a decade and a half ago, and now they're trying to rebuild their base. They have got people in all of these races, but the fact is it's going to be very difficult. And that doesn't help Drew Edmondson, and it doesn't help John Cox. You're looking at resources. What do you do with these other races? You can't walk off from them, but heaven's sakes, this doesn't look like most of them will be competitive.
Right, and honestly, their best plan of attack right now is to go the Leslie Osborne route, which is to do these comparison ads rather than the attack ads. Again, Oklahomans don't have much of a stomach for the nasty attack ads. They don't work here as well as they do in other parts of the country. But people do want to be informed. So you come up with these informational ads, these comparison ads. That's the type of thing that's going to help. But is it going to push somebody like John Cox over? I don't think so.
All right, let's talk for just a moment about your bailiwick, which is the legislature, because you're out there every day during the session and many days during the summer and the fall. There's there's been no partisanship up until now because they were having their runoffs and the primaries. But Trace Savage over at NonDoc did a story this week. I believe it was Trace who did the story about how many people are not coming back. I mean, about half of the legislature are going to be rookies.
Yep.
Plus, you've had a lot of these chairmen and chairwomen who are either retiring or they were defeated. So you have a couple of scenarios. One is that the leadership in the legislature, Senator Treat and Speaker McCall and Leader Eccles and Leader Sanders, are going to be much more powerful because the power is going to concentrate. You could have the specter of committee chair people who are freshman legislators.
Yes.
Term limits from the grave, right? Well, it's not from the grave, it's still there. But this shows what happens when you have so many people leaving all at once.
Yeah. And again, I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. We need to have this kind of a turnover. I'm a big fan of term limits, but it's a double-edged sword. With term limits, obviously you can't have the same legislators legislating over and over and over again, the same people in power. Our founding fathers never meant for it to be a career to be a politician. They meant for it to be somebody to serve their community and then move on. But that said, we all know that there's a lot of power with the outside influences, the folks who are trying to make things happen at the Capitol that can easily outweigh these politicians from one year to the next. So it's really a double-edged sword.
Let's talk about a question that folks in the media who watch this could have some fun with. Fun with legislators. Let's review. A couple of weeks ago, you had a large number of very conservative platform caucus folks who were defeated at the polls.
Right.
The central issue there was 1010, the tax increase.
Yep.
The Republicans that were defeated by other Republicans. So that sometimes that's lost on the media and the public. But the fact is, it was all inter-party. Then there were 3 incumbents who were forced into runoffs who voted for 1010. So House Bill 1010, the education tax increase, batted about 90% during the runoffs, people being for this. Here's the question. Have some fun. Ask your lawmaker who's more in touch with Republican leadership at the legislature, Drew Edmondson or Kevin Stitt?
And this will be fun to watch because, again, we had so many legislators who lost their jobs because they didn't back 1010XX, which was the funding mechanism for the teacher pay raise. It wasn't the teacher pay raise, it's the funding mechanism for it. Kevin Stitt did not back 1010XX. He says that he backed the teacher raise, he didn't back the funding mechanism. So it'll be interesting to see how that impacts him. Drew Edmondson on the other side says that the teacher pay raise was a good start, but he does want to raise taxes to give teachers more of a pay increase. And this is not a very tax-friendly state. So I think that both of these guys are going to take shots as a result of that.
What are you hearing out there in the halls? I know they're all out campaigning, but you know the whispers. You know what's going on behind the scenes. You have Republicans who campaigned, I'm for 1010. You have the standard bearer in the governor's race saying, has he said, I would have voted for 1010 or I would have opposed 1010? Has he made a public statement on that? Yeah.
He has said that he is opposed to 1010XX. He would have been opposed to 1010XX, but he was in favor of the teacher pay increase. He just believed there's better ways of funding the teacher pay raise. But we asked him, would he overturn 1010XX if elected governor? The answer is no. He's not going to overturn the will of the people.
Okay, so it's a very political answer.
Very political answer for a non-politician.
So what you have here is you have the governor's race. Drew Edmondson he was out there all the time, by the way, on 1010.
He was out of the Capitol all the time. He lived there.
He did. And during that fortnight back a few months ago, how are Republicans going to campaign? You're going to have Kevin Stitt in to raise money for you when the teachers in your district, the biggest issue is House Bill 1010?
Right. I think that they've realized just how much power these teachers have. We saw this with the runoff elections. These teachers have a lot more power than I think a lot of the politicians gave them credit for. I think a lot of people underestimated them. So how is that going to play in? That's going to be interesting to watch.
Be sure to ask that question. Have some fun.
Absolutely.
It's a squirmer, right?
Yep.
It's a seat squirmer. Hey, talking about seat squirmers, let's go back 2 years ago. State questions. Now, by the way, I'm just going to be right up front about this. In the future and in the past, whenever you hear some advocate say, the people have spoken, they knew what was in this bill, That ain't true. It ain't never been true.
Right.
Okay?
You get on the ballot measures. You get 100 words, give or take. It doesn't explain to you what the 4 or 5 inch high bill really is. Yeah, they don't always know.
Yeah. Seldom do they know what's in that. But it's a good deal. I mean, you guys that advocate for or against state questions, go ahead and keep on saying it. We ain't buying because it's not true. However, there was a story this week that the ACLU has a plan to reduce prison overcrowding. 2 years ago, 780, 781 state questions, it was going to solve everything. It was going to be peace on earth. We were going to reduce prison overcrowding. Ain't happened. So why are we listening to them now?
780 and 781, essentially what they're going to do is reduce some of the penalties for certain low-level nonviolent drug crimes. And it's worked a little bit, it just hasn't worked a lot. We still have by far the highest incarceration rate per capita in the entire world and growing. In addition, the state incarcerates more women and black people at a higher rate than anybody else. ACLU says they have a plan to cut the state's prison population in half by the year 2025.
In an electoral season, looking at elections and asking people to talk about how they plan to address criminal justice reform. We nationally are launching a project later this month called Vote Smart Justice, where people will be able to go online and look at legislative candidates and see what statements they've issued on criminal justice reform and give them kind of a starting point for questions on how they plan to be part of the solution. We're doing legislative advocacy work and seeing how we can bring policy suggestions to the table. Part of that is our 50-state blueprint project we just launched that looks at policy outcomes that could help lead to that 50% reduction and what impact that would have on racial disparities.
Half seems to be a pretty arbitrary number. And in their explanation, I really didn't see too much of a plan. The ACLU says these are the reforms that taxpayers want. They're saying they can save about $615 million, but I didn't really see a firm plan in place to do it.
Senator Roger Thompson ran a bill last year that would have allowed for post-sentence modification for folks currently incarcerated for crimes that would be misdemeanors under State Question 780. So I think really creative solutions like that say there are a number of people that are currently in prison for things that today wouldn't carry that same sentence. I think limiting pretrial detention is a big part of it. On any given day in Oklahoma, more than 70% of people in jail haven't even had their day in court. And that means that they can't go to their jobs, they can't earn money, and they rack up all of these fines and fees as a result. I think it means looking at and investing in diversion programs and alternatives to incarceration.
I would say it sounds like we're going to build that wall and Mexico's going to pay for it. Or any number of campaign promises that people are, look, campaign promises are cheap. And oftentimes people don't go back and revisit those campaign promises, right? DAs were very clear a couple of years ago saying it's not going to work. They got bulldozed at the polls. 780 went through. 781, I don't think it's not even in effect actually at this particular point. But why is this conversation still going on? Can I put it more bluntly? Whose fault is this we are not getting down the road on this?
That 788 and 781 failed as miserably as it has? I mean, there's a number of different places you can look. Do you look towards the DAs? Do you look towards the fact that there's money in incarceration? There's a number of different places that we can look at this. Bottom line, though, is that the ACLU is right on this one to a certain degree. We have way too many people who are in jail or in prison right now. Their idea in terms of letting more people out who are awaiting sentences kind of makes sense. Because again, if I'm picked up on something, I'm innocent until proven guilty. But while I'm in jail waiting for my hearing or for the court to work its way through the process, I can't work. I can't feed my family. I can't pay taxes. I'm just basically sitting there being warehoused. So is it right for nonviolent offenders, nonviolent suspects to be held that long pending their arraignments, et cetera? I don't know.
Well, there's a lot of force behind. There's a lot of money, by the way, on the pro-prison reform process. I don't know where it's coming from. I think that'd be a great job for the media to look at where all this money's coming from. But a couple of years ago, you had a legislator, Scott Biggs, former legislator, who's now gone to the federal government. But the fact was, he was standing up against himself. He got vilified, and then domestic violence advocates tell me, hey, he was standing up against making some of these penalties for domestic violence, making them less effective. But that seemed to go past the media. So this is a very complicated issue. There's a lot of money behind this. There are a lot of promises that haven't been fulfilled, and I'm wondering where this is going to go and if the public's going to engage, because it is out in the weeds.
It's going to have to happen at some point. There's going to be some form of criminal justice reform. We've got a prison system that's just unsustainable right now. Joe Albaugh asking for $800 million to build new prisons. We don't have that kind of money right now. A lot of what the ACLU is pitching here is the same kind of thing that made Texas so successful with their prison reform, is that they took a lot of the money they were putting towards prisons and instead putting it towards better drug and substance abuse treatment, alcohol treatment, and hiring on more people to watch those that are involved in these types of activities, parole board, that kind of a thing. So they invested money properly. Problem is, up till now, we just didn't have the money that we could invest it. We couldn't keep both the prisons open and at the same time focus on treating those who have drug abuse and substance abuse issues. So right now, it looks like we've got $1.1 or $1.2 billion more coming in than we did last year. Maybe this is time to start investing in that.
Last topic this morning. You know, one of the things that people have been talking about, especially those folks running at the top, we're going to audit all these state agencies.
Yep.
And we have had a situation this week where that an audit was done by the state auditor inspector before the runoff, which you can go to Mitchell Talks, you can hear that podcast I did with the auditor inspector. He thought I was unfair about it, and we had a podcast. I didn't edit it. I still rung his bell over it, and you can go listen to that at Mitchell Talks. But the fact is, this week, that audit was brought up in front of the VA Commission.
Right.
The VA Commission's very solidly behind their guy. Some media people apparently just gobbled that audit, which I think is questionable, because it mostly talked to malcontents and non-hackers, and that's what the board said. But are we going to see this issue of audits and who's going to be doing the audits? Because we know the legislature has been slowly defunding that auditor inspector's office because they don't trust them. Healthcare, some of that audit that was done down in Grady County, a lot of questionable stuff there. Is this going to be a big issue in your opinion coming up?
It is, and that Veterans Affairs audit, according to the auditor, Gary Jones, they found a, quote, culture of fear and intimidation exists at Veterans Affairs, and that morale was reportedly at an all-time low. And Doug Elliott, who is the executive director of Veterans Affairs, he flat out said that's not the case.
Didn't happen. There was no impropriety that was found. There was no finance malfeasance. No impropriety was found, nor does any exist.
So we talked with Gary Jones afterwards. He stands by the audit. He says that it's not politicized. The board, however, the board believed that it was because what you addressed also in terms of the timing of it. Why was it released when it was? They believed it was all political because there were a lot of people that don't want Talihina closed. Gary Jones talked with him. He says that's simply not the case. He says that he released the audit when he did because that's when the audit was done.
Kind of unusual for them to go through an audit without asking the auditors to come present the items. Our team was ready to do that. We've always done that before in the past.
Yeah. All right, it was done, but he never had released an audit before where one of his people was running for a statewide office. Let's be real about it. It was political as it can be, and it was. So.
And a lot of people said that it wasn't a fair audit because basically he did a lot of interviews with
malcontents and non-hackers.
People who were former employees, talking with them anonymously.
You got that right, by the way. The president needs to call you so you can say anonymous.
Anonymous.
Yeah, we can say it several times.
Professional broadcaster. He just does say anonymous.
All right, so we'll see this because the auditing state agencies, again, it's who's going to be doing the auditing and what kind of audit is it. It's a lot deeper than what we've been hearing from politicians and in the media. Well, that wraps up this pod. Thanks for watching. Follow Aaron Brillbeck on Facebook at News 9, and we'll sign off now. And just one more thing we would like to say. Grant Herms, good night wherever you are.